They thought she was doomed, but one human's courage lit a fire that no chains could hold. An alien girl, enslaved and marked for death, had lost all hope, until a wounded human soldier refused to let her perish. Against overwhelming cruelty, he stood by her side, sparking a rebellion inside the prison. Together, they broke their chains, toppled their captors, and led the captives to freedom. What began as one act of compassion became a fire that proved a simple truth: even in the darkest corners of the galaxy, humanity's courage can change everything. The cell was small, no larger than a storage crate. Its walls were rough metal, cold enough to burn skin if she leaned against them for too long. There was no bed, no blanket, not even a place to sit comfortably. Only the floor, damp, stained with the blood and sweat of those who had come before her. She sat curled in the corner, knees pulled tight to her chest, her trembling hands clasped around them. Her eyes, once bright with the colors of her people's homeworld, were dull now, hollow from days without rest, from the endless cycle of fear and hunger. Every sound in the corridor made her flinch: the thud of boots, the crackle of electric prods, the guttural laughs of the guards. They had taken everything from her. Her family. Her voice. Even her name felt distant now, a faint echo she dared not speak aloud in case it drew attention. Here, she was not a daughter or a friend. She was not even a prisoner. She was property. The aliens who held her, the Draxer, were merciless. They thrived on dominance, on making others bend until they snapped. Their world was built on conquest, their cruelty sharpened into ritual. To them, the suffering of captives was entertainment. A lesson. A way to remind every lesser species what happened when you resisted. And she had resisted. When they came to her village, she had fought, small and desperate though she was. She had thrown stones at armored soldiers, screamed defiance as they dragged her neighbors away. For that, she was not killed but taken. A prize. A warning. The guards never let her forget it. "You'll beg before the end," one of them sneered the night before, shoving her against the bars so hard her ribs still ached. "They all do. You'll learn what it means to be nothing." Nothing. The word echoed inside her, heavier than chains. At first, she had held on to hope. She had told herself that someone would come, that her people would rally, that the nightmare would not last forever. But days turned to weeks, and no one came. Each time the door opened, it was not rescue waiting for her, it was pain. They made her watch others suffer. They forced her to carry loads too heavy for her frail body, whipping her when she stumbled. They deprived her of food until her stomach was a constant knot of fire. And when they laughed, when their jagged teeth bared and their voices boomed with cruel delight, it broke something inside her. By the time the next morning came, she had stopped hoping. The cell door screeched open. She jerked upright, heart pounding, eyes wide with the instinct of prey. 2 Draxer guards filled the doorway, their armor gleaming dark under the corridor lights. One carried a prod, the other a chain. "Out," the first barked. She hesitated, clutching her knees tighter. The prod crackled, blue sparks leaping between its jagged ends. The guard tilted it toward her, amusement flickering in his reptilian eyes. Now. Her body obeyed before her mind could resist. She staggered to her feet, legs weak, throat dry. The chain was snapped around her wrists, tight enough to bite her skin. She winced but did not cry out. She had learned not to give them that satisfaction. Dragged into the corridor, she kept her eyes down. Other prisoners watched from their cells, gaunt faces, silent mouths. No one spoke. No one dared. They brought her to the yard. It was a wide, open pit surrounded by high walls topped with crackling fences. Storm clouds churned above, though no rain ever fell here. The Draxer preferred their world dry, scorched, unforgiving. In the center of the yard, a post jutted from the ground. Chains dangled from it like the remains of broken wings. She knew what it was for. Her stomach turned cold. "No," she whispered, the word slipping out before she could catch it. The guard backhanded her, sending her sprawling into the dirt. Stars burst behind her eyes. She tasted blood. "Do not speak unless commanded," he growled. The second guard yanked her up by the chains, dragging her toward the post. She stumbled, legs scraping against the jagged gravel. When they fastened her wrists high above her head, the metal tore her skin. She hung there, trembling, the weight of her own body pulling against the shackles. Around her, the guards gathered. A ring of armored monsters, their eyes glinting with cruel anticipation. They muttered to one another, laughing. Some pointed at her, shaking their heads. "Too weak. Won't last the day. She'll break faster than the others." Another one doomed. Doomed. The word struck harder than the blow had. She closed her eyes, wishing she could vanish into the dirt. If she let her mind drift, maybe the pain wouldn't be so sharp. Maybe the humiliation wouldn't cut so deep. Maybe this would be the end. And part of her welcomed it. But then. A voice. Not cruel. Not mocking. Calm. Steady. Low, but carrying across the yard with a weight that made even the Draxer pause. "Leave her." Her eyes shot open. Across the pit, another prisoner stood. He was human. Tall, broad-shouldered despite the chains that bound his wrists. His face was battered, one eye swollen, his lips split. His clothes hung in tatters, his back marked with the stripes of many beatings. And yet, he stood straight. Unbowed. The guards turned toward him, laughter rising again. "You dare speak," one jeered. "You'll share her fate." Another hissed. The human didn't flinch. His gaze stayed fixed on her, steady as stone. "She's not doomed," he said, his voice rough but clear. "Not while I'm here." For the first time in weeks, something stirred in her chest. It wasn't hope, not yet. But it was enough to keep her eyes open. Enough to make her want to hear what else he might say. Enough to make her wonder. Could he really mean it? Could one human, just one, change anything at all? The yard fell silent for a moment after the human spoke. His words hung in the air like a challenge, like a stone dropped into still water. The Draxer guards stared at him, their scaled lips curling back into snarls. Then laughter erupted, harsh, grating, cruel. "Not doomed," one sneered, stepping closer. "Look at her, human. She's already half dead." Another jabbed his prod into the man's ribs. Sparks danced across his skin. He grunted, his muscles tensing, but he did not cry out. "She's doomed," the guard hissed. "And so are you." They struck him again, harder this time. The crack echoed in the yard. He staggered but stayed on his feet, chains rattling as he steadied himself. The girl, still bound to the post, watched through blurred vision. Something inside her wanted to look away, to shield herself from what would surely come next. Yet she couldn't. Her eyes locked on him, unwilling, unable to turn aside. Because he didn't bow. Even when beaten, even when surrounded, he stood. The guards lost interest after a while. Their fun had limits, and there were other captives to torment. With a final shove, they left the human where he was, chained at the edge of the yard. Blood trickled down his side, but he lifted his head, his gaze sweeping the pit until it found hers again. For a heartbeat, they simply stared at one another. And in that silence, she realized something strange: he wasn't looking at her with pity. Not with scorn, either. He looked at her as if she mattered. Later, when the yard emptied and the prisoners were herded back to their cells, she was dragged past him. The guards didn't care enough to stop them from locking eyes as she passed. He gave her the smallest nod. It was nothing, just a fraction of movement. But to her, it was more than she had received in weeks. A sign. A reminder that she wasn't alone. That night, she lay curled on the floor of her cell, sleep refusing to come. Every sound in the dark seemed sharper. Every shadow stretched longer. Yet her mind kept circling back to the human. Who was he? Why did he defy them when everyone else had given up? And why, out of all the prisoners, did he choose to speak for her? The next morning, the guards dragged them both out again. This time, they were thrown into the labor pits. The pits were cruel in their design, deep trenches where prisoners hauled stone and metal under the blazing suns. No tools were given, only bare hands, bloodied and blistered from endless work. She was pushed into the dirt with a sharp command, "Move." Her body protested every motion. Muscles ached, joints throbbed, lungs burned. The chain on her ankle forced her steps into a shuffle, and when she stumbled, the guards jeered. The human was thrown nearby. She noticed how he moved differently, not faster, not stronger, but steadier. His body bore the same marks of exhaustion as hers, yet he carried himself as if every burden was something he had already prepared to bear. When she faltered beneath the weight of a heavy slab, her knees buckling, he was there. He reached her side before the guards could, sliding his shoulder under the stone and lifting it with her. She gasped, too shocked to speak. The guard barked a laugh. Helping her? Fool. The prod lashed out, striking him across the back. He staggered but didn't let go. Together, they dropped the stone into place. He turned his head slightly, enough for her to hear his voice. "Don't stop," he murmured. "That's what they want." Her chest tightened. She didn't know why, but his words dug deep. Days passed like that. Work in the pits. Hunger gnawed at her belly. Guards watching with eager cruelty. But in that endless cycle, the human became different. A constant. He didn't speak often, but when he did, it mattered. Small words. Steady words. Words that gave her something to hold on to. Breathe. Stand. Keep moving. When she collapsed from exhaustion, he shielded her from blows. When her hands bled from torn skin, he wrapped them with scraps from his own rags. When despair threatened to choke her, he looked at her with those unbroken eyes, and somehow, she found the strength to rise again. One night, after they were thrown back into their cells, she whispered through the bars that separated them. "Why?" Her voice was barely a thread of sound, almost lost in the silence. Still, he heard. "Why what?" he asked, his tone calm, steady as always. "Why help me? You don't know me." There was a pause. She thought he wouldn't answer. Then he spoke. "Because you're not nothing." Her breath caught. The guards had spat that word at her so many times that she had started to believe it. Nothing. Worthless. Doomed. But he said it differently. As if it were the simplest truth in the world, that she was something. Someone. Tears stung her eyes, though she blinked them away quickly. She didn't want him to see her cry. "What's your name?" she asked. "Kieran." The name was strange to her ears, sharp and solid. She whispered it once, softly, as if testing its weight. "Kieran." He didn't ask for hers, and she was glad. She wasn't ready to say it aloud again. Not yet. But for the first time in what felt like forever, she closed her eyes and let herself believe there might be something beyond the chains. The Draxer thought their cruelty was absolute, that no prisoner could resist despair forever. But they hadn't counted on the human. And though she didn't know it yet, his quiet defiance had already changed everything. The days blurred together. Work in the pits. Beatings. Silence in the cells. But the Draxer thrived on escalation. Cruelty was not just a tool, it was their entertainment. And so, one morning, the guards came for her. The clatter of their boots echoed down the corridor before she saw them. She shrank into the corner of her cell, clutching her arms around herself. But there was no hiding, no escape. The door slammed open, and rough hands dragged her out. She struggled weakly, but her body betrayed her, too weak from hunger and wounds. They laughed at her feeble resistance as they snapped chains around her wrists and shoved her forward. Where? She tried to ask, but the question was cut short by a blow to her stomach. The air fled her lungs, and she crumpled to her knees. No talking, the guard snarled. She staggered forward under their grip, her mind a haze of fear. The corridor opened into the yard, the pit she hated most. But this time, something was different. It wasn't just guards waiting. It was a crowd. Dozens of Draxer lined the edges, their armored forms gleaming under the harsh light. They jeered, their guttural voices filling the air with venom. Some shouted insults, others spat, their words striking like stones. At the center of the yard stood a platform. Chains hung from it, slick with old stains. Her blood turned to ice. Execution. Not swift, not merciful. A display. Her knees buckled, and the guards hauled her upright again, laughing. She's shaking already. Won't even last a minute. The crowd roared with cruel delight. They chained her to the platform. The metal bit into her raw wrists as she hung there, head bowed, trembling. The jeers washed over her like a storm. She had thought herself empty, beyond tears. But as she heard the laughter, the chants of "doomed," "doomed" ringing from every throat, she felt hot shame burn her cheeks. They wanted her to break. To scream. To beg. And part of her wanted to. Because wasn't that all she was now? A toy for them to break? Then, a sound cut through the crowd. A voice. Calm. Steady. Human. Enough. Her head jerked up, eyes widening. Kieran. He stood at the edge of the yard, surrounded by guards. His chains rattled as they tried to force him down, but he held his ground. His face was bruised, blood streaking his jaw, yet his eyes, those unbroken eyes, burned with fire. "Let her go," he said. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried. Somehow, every Draxer fell quiet, listening. The silence lasted only a moment before it broke into howls of laughter. "Let her go?" a guard sneered. "You think you can command us, human?" Another struck him across the face with a prod. Sparks crackled, the smell of scorched flesh filling the air. He staggered, pain flashing across his face. But he didn't fall. Didn't bow. He lifted his head again, blood dripping from his lip, and repeated. "Let her go." The crowd erupted, a storm of cruel laughter. Look at him. Protecting her. Pathetic. Maybe he should take her place. The guards shoved him toward the platform, forcing him to his knees. She couldn't breathe. Her heart pounded so hard she thought it might tear through her chest. Why was he doing this? Why suffer more for her? The guards raised their weapons. No. The word tore from her throat before she realized she'd spoken. Her voice cracked, weak from disuse, but it carried. "Stop. Don't hurt him." The crowd roared with mocking laughter. She begs for him now. Two doomed fools. But she didn't care. She fought against her chains, wrists bleeding as she struggled. Her voice was raw, desperate. "Don't hurt him. Please." Kieran turned his head toward her. Even through the chaos, their eyes met. And he smiled. It was faint, weary, bloodied, but it was a smile. "Don't beg," he said softly. "Not for me. Not for them." Something inside her shifted. All this time, she had believed she was doomed. That there was no choice but to submit, to break. That was what the Draxer wanted her to believe. But Kieran, he refused. Even beaten, even shackled, he declined. And in that moment, a spark lit in her chest. Small, fragile, but real. Hope. The guards beat him until he collapsed. The crowd cheered, voices shaking the air. The spectacle had entertained them, and that was all that mattered. They left her on the platform, hanging in her chains, and dragged Kieran back to his cell. Hours passed. The crowd dispersed. Night fell, the yard empty and silent. Her body throbbed with pain, her wrists raw and bleeding. Every breath hurt. She should have been broken, hollow. But she wasn't. Because she remembered his eyes. His voice. That faint smile. "You're not doomed," he had told her once. "Not while I'm here." And now she believed him. Even if she didn't know how. Even if the path was still shrouded in darkness. Somehow, she believed. The night after the spectacle, she lay awake in her cell. Her wrists burned where the iron had bitten into them. Her ribs ached with every shallow breath. The shame of being paraded before the Draxer still clung to her like a second skin. And yet, she couldn't stop thinking of him. Kieran. She had watched him take every strike meant to humiliate him. Watched him bleed, fall, and rise again. Watched him smile at her, not with cruelty, not with pity, but with defiance. That smile lived in her mind now, stubbornly refusing to fade. A whisper reached her through the bars. "You still awake?" Her eyes widened. She shifted slowly, ignoring the pain, until she pressed her cheek to the cold stone and peered through the narrow slit that separated her cell from his. She saw him there, leaning against the wall, his face half-shadowed. Even in the dark, she could make out the swollen bruise on his cheek, the cuts across his brow. He looked broken. But his voice wasn't. "Yes," she whispered back. Her throat felt raw, but the word came easier than she expected. He nodded once. "Good." Silence stretched for a moment, broken only by the distant footsteps of patrolling guards. Then he said, "You didn't beg." Her brow furrowed. "I did." "I." "Not for yourself," he interrupted gently. "For me." "That's different." She didn't know what to say to that. No one had ever cared how she begged before. To the Draxer, her voice was nothing but fuel for their amusement. But to him, it meant something else. "Why does that matter?" she asked softly. "Because it means you're stronger than you think." "Stronger?" She almost laughed, except there was no laughter left in her. She was skin and bone, bruises and chains. Strong was the last word she would use for herself. But the way he said it, she wanted to believe. The days in the pits became different after that. The work was the same, endless lifting, hauling, bleeding. The guards' cruelty was the same, shoves, strikes, jeers. But between the two of them, something had shifted. When she faltered, he was there, steady as stone. When the guards tried to break her, his eyes reminded her that she wasn't alone. And in the rare quiet moments, they spoke. Little pieces of themselves, shared in whispers. She told him of her world, of the twin moons that hung like lanterns in the sky, of the crystal lakes where her people used to sing. Her voice trembled at first, afraid the memories would shatter in her mouth. But when she spoke, he listened. Really listened. And in return, he told her of Earth. Of oceans so vast they swallowed the horizon. Of forests so green they seemed to breathe. Of skies filled with clouds that shifted and danced with the wind. She closed her eyes and tried to picture it. Tried to imagine a world so wide, so free. "It sounds impossible," she whispered. He smiled faintly. "It's real. And one day, you'll see it." Her chest tightened. "How can you be sure?" "Because I've already decided," he said. And once a human decides, nothing can stop them. His certainty should have sounded foolish. Naive. But instead, It warmed her in a way she hadn't felt in so long. One evening, when the guards grew bored and left them chained in the yard under the stars, she dared to ask the question that had lingered in her mind. "Why do you keep helping me?" Kieran tilted his head, his gaze lifting to the sky. His silence stretched so long that she thought he might not answer. Then, quietly, he said, "Because I couldn't live with myself if I didn't." She frowned. "But, you suffer more because of it." "Pain passes," he replied simply. "But letting someone die when you could have stopped it, that stays." His words sank into her, heavy and unshakable. The Draxer had told her she was worthless, a burden, nothing. But to him, saving her mattered. Enough to endure suffering. Enough to risk more. "You're different," she whispered. He chuckled faintly, a sound roughened by pain but genuine nonetheless. "Humans usually are." Over the next days, she began to change in small ways. When the guards pushed her, she stumbled, but she no longer stayed down. When the work crushed her, she still lifted, still moved, still breathed. And when despair whispered that she was doomed, she remembered Kieran's voice, steady and unyielding, "You're not nothing." The other prisoners noticed too. Some looked at her with confusion. Others with faint glimmers of hope, as if her stubborn survival reminded them of something they had long forgotten. The Draxer noticed as well. Their jeers grew sharper, their punishments harsher. They wanted her broken again. But each time they struck her down, she rose. Not because she believed in herself. Not yet. But because he believed, and that was enough. One night, as they huddled against the cold, she finally spoke the words she had kept locked inside since the beginning. "My name," she whispered. Kieran stirred, his head turning toward her in the dark. She hesitated, her throat tight. Saying it felt dangerous, like offering a piece of herself that the Draxer had tried so hard to erase. But she wanted him to know. Needed him to know. "My name is Aaron." Silence followed. Then he repeated it softly, as if carving it into the stone itself. "Aaron." The way he said it, without mockery, without cruelty, made her chest ache. She was no longer just a prisoner. No longer just the doomed one. She was Aaron. And she was still alive. That night, she slept without nightmares for the first time since her capture. Because in the darkness of the cell, she was no longer alone. She had a name again. She had someone who believed in her. And though she didn't fully understand it yet, she had a bond that the Draxer could not chain or break. The air in the prison grew heavy in the days that followed. The guards spoke in whispers she couldn't quite hear, their laughter sharper, edged with anticipation. Even the other prisoners fell into uneasy silence, their eyes darting nervously toward her when they thought she wasn't looking. Something was coming. She could feel it. And then, one morning, it happened. The guards stormed into the cells with more purpose than usual. Chains clattered as they unlocked her door. Before she could move, two of them dragged her out, their grips bruising her arms. "Kneel, doomed one," one sneered. "Today, you entertain the clan one last time." Her blood froze. One last time. Her feet dragged against the stone as they pulled her down the corridor. The truth slammed into her like a blow, they weren't just planning another spectacle. They meant to end her. Execution. Kieran was shoved out of his cell as well, though not chained to the platform this time. No, this time, he was forced to stand among the crowd of prisoners, as if they wanted him to watch. Their eyes met as she stumbled into the open yard. Her heart lurched. His face hardened the moment he understood. The platform had been prepared. Chains gleamed under the harsh light, new and polished, as though this was meant to be something memorable. A ritual, not just a killing. The crowd of Draxer soldiers filled the arena, their guttural voices rising in a chant that rattled the air. Doomed. 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 Her knees buckled. The guards dragged her forward and bound her in place, arms spread wide, wrists locked above her head. The metal bit into her skin as she struggled weakly. The High Overseer, a hulking Draxer with scarred armor, stepped onto the platform. His voice boomed. "This one has lasted longer than expected." She clung to scraps of life, to the pity of a fragile human. "But her story ends today. Let all captives know, defiance buys you nothing. There is no hope. Only the cage, and the end." The crowd roared. Erin closed her eyes. She wanted to be strong, but terror coiled in her chest. She thought of the twin moons of her world, of the songs she would never hear again. Her breath came ragged, uneven. And then, through the noise, she heard him. "Stop." Her eyes flew open. Kieran stood at the edge of the crowd, straining against the guards who held him. His voice cut through the arena like a blade. "Let her go." The Overseer turned, amusement twisting his scarred face. "And what will you do, human? You are weak. Broken. You bleed when struck. You kneel when ordered." Kieran spat blood onto the dirt. Then he lifted his head, eyes blazing. "Not today." He wrenched forward. The guards tried to hold him, but chains snapped against their grips as he surged with a roar that shook the pit. One staggered back, struck by the sheer force of his movement. The other swung a prod, but Kieran caught it mid-strike and ripped it from his grasp. The crowd erupted in chaos. "Hold him. Kill him." But he didn't stop. He surged toward the platform, the stolen prod crackling with energy in his hand. Every step left blood on the ground, but he didn't falter. His eyes locked on Erin, and she felt the breath catch in her chest. He wasn't just fighting. He was choosing. Choosing her. The guards rushed him in waves. He struck with raw fury, not with grace or training, but with desperation sharpened into steel. The prod cracked across a helmet, sparks flying. A chain swung from his other hand like a whip, wrapping around a guard's throat. Every blow he took only seemed to drive him forward. "Get him down," the Overseer roared. Kieran's gaze flicked to Erin, chained and trembling on the platform. His voice rang out between blows, hoarse but steady. "They think you're doomed. They think we all are. But they're wrong." The words weren't just for her. They were for every prisoner watching, for every soul beaten into silence. Something stirred in the crowd of captives. Heads lifted. Eyes widened. Whispers spread like fire. "Wrong, they're wrong." Erin's heart pounded. She wanted to cry out, to beg him to stop before they killed him. But when she saw the fire in his eyes, the way he fought not just for survival but for her, the words caught in her throat. No. She couldn't tell him to stop. Not now. For the first time since her capture, she didn't feel like prey waiting to be slaughtered. For the first time, she felt alive. The Overseer roared in fury and leapt down from the platform, towering over Kieran. His blade crackled with energy as he swung. Kieran barely blocked with the prod, the force of the strike sending him sprawling to one knee. The Overseer loomed, raising his weapon for the killing blow. Erin's voice ripped from her chest before she could think. "Kieran." His head snapped up at the sound of her name for him, and in that moment, strength surged back into his limbs. He caught the blade as it descended, muscles straining, veins bulging with effort. Sparks screamed as steel met steel. With a roar, he drove forward, slamming the prod into the Overseer's chest. The crackling surge exploded, hurling the massive alien backward into the dirt. The arena fell silent. Every Draxer froze, their jeers cut short. The Overseer, undefeated, untouchable, lay writhing in the dust. And in that silence, Kieran staggered to his feet. Bloodied, trembling, but unbroken. He turned to Erin. His voice, hoarse and raw, carried across the yard. "You're not doomed. Not while I'm here. Her tears spilled freely then, hot and unstoppable. Not from despair. Not from fear. From hope. Real, burning hope. The prisoners felt it too. The silence broke into shouts, first hesitant, then rising into a chorus. Fight. Fight with him. They're wrong. The Draxer guards turned, suddenly outnumbered by the fury of dozens of captives surging forward with chains, with fists, with teeth if nothing else. The yard exploded into chaos. And as the uprising began, Aaron knew, the breaking point wasn't her execution. It was this moment. The moment a human refused to bow. The moment he chose her life over his own safety. The moment the chains truly began to crack. The prison yard had never known silence. It had always been filled with the scrape of chains, the guttural laughter of guards, the crack of whips. But for a heartbeat, after Kieran dropped the overseer, silence blanketed everything. Then it broke, like a dam bursting. The prisoners roared. Shackled hands became weapons. Rusted chains swung like whips. Broken stones were hurled at armored guards. Decades of crushed voices surged into one sound, defiance. The Draxer hadn't expected it. They had ruled with fear so long they believed rebellion impossible. Now fear turned its teeth on them. Aaron yanked against her chains until her wrists burned raw. She could hardly see through her tears as chaos erupted around her. Aaron. Her head snapped up. Kieran was already climbing the platform, his body staggering with exhaustion, but his eyes blazing with purpose. He slammed the butt of his stolen prod into the lock holding her chains. Sparks screamed, and the metal cracked. The manacles split open, and she collapsed forward into his arms. "You're free," he rasped. His voice was shredded, but the words carried more weight than the iron that had bound her. She wanted to say something, anything, but no words came. She only clutched him tightly, breathing him in, as though anchoring herself to his presence. But there was no time. Guards were swarming the platform. "Stay behind me," he said, raising the prod. For a moment, the old fear returned. Stay behind him. Hide. Let him fight. But no. Not this time. Her fingers closed around a fallen chain, the links heavy and jagged. She met his gaze. Together. A faint, fierce smile cut through the blood on his face. He nodded once. Together. The first guard lunged. Kieran's prod cracked across his chest, sending him crashing backward. Another swung a blade toward Aaron. She ducked low, whipping the chain with all her strength. It struck the guard's knee with a sickening snap, dropping him to the ground. The sight jolted her. She had never fought before. She had never thought she could. But tonight, fear no longer chained her hands. Tonight, she wasn't prey. She was alive. The battle surged across the yard. Prisoners overwhelmed their captors with sheer numbers, their desperation transforming into strength. The Draxer fought viciously, but for every blow they landed, another prisoner rose in their place. Through it all, Aaron stayed close to Kieran. He shielded her when strikes came too fast. She covered him when his strength faltered. Every move became a rhythm, a dance carved from survival and trust. The overseer rose again, roaring, his armor scorched but his fury unbroken. He charged the platform, swinging his massive blade in a wide arc. Kieran barely had time to react. The blade struck the prod, snapping it in two. He staggered backward, weaponless. The overseer loomed over him, victory in his eyes. Aaron didn't think. She moved. The chain in her hand whipped upward, wrapping around the overseer's throat. She pulled with every ounce of strength left in her body. The alien bellowed, thrashing, trying to tear the chain free. "Kieran," she cried. He surged forward, seizing the moment. With a roar, he drove the broken half of the prod into the overseer's chest. Energy flared, sparks ripping through armor and flesh alike. The overseer convulsed, and fell. The yard went still again. The prisoners stared, wide-eyed, as the body of the Draxer leader hit the ground with a dull, final thud. And then, like lightning tearing across the sky, the silence was shattered. Down with them. Freedom. Kill the masters. The uprising turned unstoppable. The guards' formation broke, their discipline crumbling as the tide of furious captives swept them away. Kieran leaned against the platform rail, panting hard, blood dripping from his side. Aaron caught him before he fell. "You're hurt." He gave a pained laugh. "You're not exactly spotless yourself." She glanced down, her arms and legs streaked with blood and grime, her wrists raw where the shackles had torn free. And yet, for the first time since her capture, she felt whole. "What now?" she asked. Kieran's gaze swept the yard, then lifted to the looming gates of the prison. Beyond them was the world, freedom, or death. "We break out," he said. "All of us." The prisoners rallied, swarming the gates. Some hauled heavy beams, others tore weapons from fallen guards. Each strike against the metal rang out like a heartbeat, stronger and stronger. Erin stood at Kieran's side, her hands gripping the chain. She wasn't the girl who had been dragged onto that platform anymore. She was part of this fight. "Together," she whispered again. He nodded, pressing his bloodied forehead briefly against hers before turning back to the battle. "Together." With one final, earth-shaking crash, the gates buckled and burst. The cold night air rushed in, carrying the scent of pine and freedom. For a heartbeat, no one moved. They had lived so long in cages, they hardly remembered what open space felt like. Then Kieran stepped forward. And where he went, they followed. The fire of rebellion spread behind them. The prison burned, smoke curling into the night sky like a beacon. Erin glanced back once, watching the flames consume the place of her torment. She thought of the words the Draxer had hissed at her, again and again, "You are doomed." Her hand found Kieran's. His grip, though bloodied and trembling, was steady. No. She was not doomed. Not anymore. The world beyond the gates was cold, but the air tasted like life. Erin stumbled into the night alongside the flood of freed captives. Her lungs burned as she gulped the crisp wind, so different from the stale rot of the prison cells. For a moment, she could only stand there, her chest heaving, the stars wheeling above her like a promise she had forgotten existed. Around her, others wept openly. Some clutched each other. Some laughed like madmen, their voices ragged with disbelief. A few simply collapsed into the dirt, overwhelmed by the weight of freedom. But Erin's eyes searched for only one figure. And then she saw him. Kieran stood at the edge of the clearing, his body hunched with exhaustion, one hand pressed against the wound in his side. Blood seeped between his fingers, but he was still on his feet. Still breathing. Still looking at the horizon as though daring the stars themselves to defy him. Her legs carried her forward before she even realized. "Kieran." He turned, his eyes softening when they found her. Despite the grime and blood on his face, despite the tremor in his body, he smiled. "You made it," he whispered. She threw her arms around him, holding him as though the universe might try to steal him away if she let go. His breath caught, but he wrapped his arms around her in return, firm and steady. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The freed prisoners began to scatter, some already vanishing into the tree-line, others huddling together in groups. But a quiet circle formed around Kieran and Erin. The others looked to him, not as a fellow captive anymore, but as something else. The one who had stood when all seemed lost. A grizzled Florin, scales cracked from years of labor, spoke in a voice rough with awe. We thought there was no hope. That they owned us forever." His eyes flicked to Kieran. "You proved them wrong." Kieran shifted uncomfortably, as if the weight of their gratitude sat heavily on his shoulders. I didn't do this alone. His gaze slid to Aaron. I just couldn't let them take her. Her throat tightened. He said it so simply, as though it were obvious. As though stepping into the fire for her had been the only possible choice. They set camp in the woods that night, building small fires from broken branches. The forest echoed with quiet voices, stories spilling out after years of silence. Names were shared. Memories reclaimed. It felt fragile, like glass, but it was real. Aaron sat beside Kieran at the edge of the camp. She cleaned his wound with a torn cloth, her hands trembling as she worked. Every wince of pain from him stabbed at her heart. You shouldn't have done it, she murmured finally. He raised an eyebrow. What? Saved you. Risked everything. You could have died. His answer came without hesitation. Then it would have been worth it. She froze, the cloth slipping from her fingers. His eyes met hers, steady despite the exhaustion. There was no bravado, no posturing. Just truth. Her chest ached with a flood of emotions she couldn't name. Gratitude. Awe. Something warmer, deeper, terrifying in its intensity. She whispered, why? You barely knew me. Kieran leaned back against the tree, his eyes drifting up to the stars. For a long time, he didn't answer. Then, quietly. Because you reminded me what's worth fighting for. Because no one deserves to be told they're doomed. Silence stretched between them. Not empty, full, alive, charged with everything they had survived. Aaron finally rested her head against his shoulder. For the first time in so long, she didn't feel small. She didn't feel broken. She felt free. Dawn broke slowly over the treetops, painting the sky in gold. The survivors stirred, their breath fogging in the chill morning. Birds called from distant branches. Life went on, heedless of the suffering that had once festered behind stone walls. Kieran rose unsteadily, wincing but refusing help. He gazed at the horizon, jaw set. There will be more prisons, he said quietly. More people are still trapped. Aaron followed his gaze. Then we'll free them. He blinked at her, as though surprised by her certainty. She felt heat rise in her cheeks, but didn't look away. You gave me back hope, Kieran. Now I want to give it to others. A slow smile spread across his battered face. Together, then. Her answer came without hesitation. Together. The others gathered as the sun climbed higher, drawn to the human and the alien girl who had lit the spark. Plans formed, not perfect, not complete, but fueled by determination. They would not scatter and vanish into silence. They would become something more. A movement. And at the heart of it stood a single truth, one that echoed in every freed prisoner's chest. They had been told they were doomed. But doom was a lie. Because a human had stepped in. Because he had chosen compassion over survival, courage over surrender. Because when the universe seemed darkest, a single spark of humanity had burned brighter than all the cruelty in the stars. As they set out into the wilderness, leaving the ashes of the prison behind, Aaron walked at Kieran's side. Her hand brushed his, and he took it without hesitation. For the first time since her capture, she wasn't afraid of what lay ahead. She was ready. Because she knew, deep in her soul, she was not doomed. Not while a human walked beside her.